So what I want to do next is talk about control number 11. Control number 11 says, how do we be concerned around secure configurations for our network devices? Remember we broke up the 20 controls into 3 discrete tracks? This is the place where day one of launching this initiative, you can engage your network teams to say, there's something I want you to do. While we have the systems and operations teams working on inventory of authorized devices and then software and then scanning their systems a lot, day one for the network teams can be control number 11. Here's the projects that we want to have worked on concurrently. And then later on in the afternoon, we'll talk about controls 16 through 20, where we can engage our application teams as well to be involved at the same time. And again, the idea is have 3 separate teams start to work at the same time will help us become completed with implementing the controls in a much more timely basis. Before we did that, so meaning versions 1 through 5, we would say start at number 1 and then a couple of years later get to control number 11. So that's the way of thinking that we've applied to this particular division of the controls. When we're looking at these, we're talking about what would it look like in our organization to be able to control this in our environment. What would it look like to have those similar conversations with our networking team of, thank you for doing the job that you do. We're depending on you. And it's always available. We never give you credit for the things when it's working. We only get mad when it's not working. A new conversation that says, how do we make sure that the ports, protocols, and services, how do we make sure that the configuration matches our defined configuration baselines? And when those things change, we want to know as quickly as possible that there's been a change to those configuration devices. The example I gave yesterday, I really like to know within 5 minutes when there's a change for the running configuration on my production firewalls or my production core switches and routers within 5 minutes. Because I want to see, is that change on purpose? Did someone put in a change request, go through the testing procedures at a certain time of the day, certain week of the month, and our change windows make those changes? Or is that indicative of a potential compromise that could be starting in our organization? That's definitely in the category of things I want to know quickly, and things I want you to know quickly when they change in your organization. When the change is not authorized, it's time to act, it's time to pull the fire alarm and proverbial fire alarm and get our incident response teams engaged, investigating, determining what just happened. Particular tool that we have in place, so sample attack tool here, Flash Dance with a P from HP Labs. The idea of this particular tool is, what would it look like if we had this particular tool that would look at the firmware of our network devices in place? Has anyone used or had experience with this particular tool before? Normally when I ask this, students are like, no, never had that. Of course, maybe it's because I've never taught this class at HP before where this particular tool is made available. My understanding is they keep it pretty close to themselves because of the exercises at which it puts hardware through to see can it be, or testing scenarios at which these systems could be used against itself. So this particular tool, again, the architecture is to kind of send commands, do fuzzing, send different types of commands and what we're expected, and see how the underlying operating system for our firmware responds to that. This particular tool is for exploit research. I've got this exploit that when it happens, it could cause damage to these network equipment. What is the likelihood that that would happen and be successful on these networking devices? Breach case study, community health systems. Community health systems. So in this one, what we're looking at is a data breach of 4.5 million patient records, again in 2014. So that means in the healthcare industry, again, when you have a data breach, there's an expectation of when you lose more than 500 healthcare records for citizens in a given state, you get the privilege of getting on the phone with that state's attorney general and saying, oops, we weren't as best as stewards of that information as what we should have been. And that's certainly what happened here. What's interesting here is that in this particular case, it was because of the Heartbleed vulnerability in Juniper routers. So Juniper was the vendor that was being used at Community Health Services. They knew about the issue. I tell you, when there's a high-profile vulnerability that has a special name and has a logo and has a website, I've seen that there's a high potential that executives and leaders in your organization, as well as media attention, are going to jump on that, whether it's a big deal or whether it's not a big deal. So something to keep in mind, like an internal metric to say, when those things happen, some people are outside of your security team are probably going to be discussing about it and perhaps expect to have updates. Can you think of some other ones besides Heartbleed that have names and logos and fancy icons? Meltdown, Spectre, Crack, it's right. These particular names that say named vulnerabilities that have a lot of media attention, I really encourage you to have procedures in place to get ahead of that. Briefing your leadership teams on here's what the impact is to our organization for the next high-profile vulnerability like that is a whole lot better than them asking and then you giving the response of, I need a week to figure that out and I'll get a briefing to you later. It really shows the maturity or possible higher level of maturity for your organization. So on this particular one, credentials were, because of this particular Heartbleed vulnerability was in place. Credentials were used to create a new trusted VPN connection that was actually used to siphon off that information. So think of this in terms of making a new firewall rule to allow traffic to go to a place where it was not allowed to go in the past. Because of this, and in particular, 4.5 million patient records went places that were unauthorized, and the impacts of that to a given organization. So again, taking those types of high-profile issues that happen, in that particular case, the Heartbleed bug, when that happens, allowing anyone on the internet to read the memory of the systems protected by these vulnerable versions of devices in place and be able to modify, alter, and cause these devices to do things that are unintended. What's interesting is there's some studies around when big data breaches like this happen. Why are some companies successful at responding to and getting their customers to come back, and other companies are not as successful post-breach? There's a PhD paper around this that says there's this idea of this big event. Companies that have a big event after a major data breach seem to have better customer confidence, consumer confidence, board support, etc. What's a big event? Well, some major breaches, the big event is the CEO doesn't get to work there anymore, or the CIO, or the CISO, or other major events in changing the organizational structure in response to data breaches. And it's interesting to look at those, to compare data breaches you've heard about or read about in the past, to look at what is the court of public opinion with respect to how that organization responded to massive public data breaches. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond. It's not what happens, it's how you respond. What is that response? What does that look like? What are some of the steps that organizations do to demonstrate, here's what happens, here's how we responded? A couple of examples to compare and contrast. If you compare and contrast two major credit card breaches, one from Home Depot, one from Target. Target happened first, then Home Depot happened. Target, 85+ million credit cards lost through a third-party vendor that they had in place. It was able to siphon off credit card numbers from the point of sale. Target's response to that particular breach. I'm not picking on them, I'm just doing a comparison between one company and another and the lessons that we can pull from that. Target, there is no problem. We don't have an issue, everything is okay. Oh, we have a problem, but it's contained, it's not that bad. Later on, oh, the message gets bigger, the impact gets worse. Later on, weeks, months later, then we learn about how big that data breach was and the impacts that we had as a result. Not that long afterwards, the Home Depot breach. Home Depot, based in my hometown, Atlanta, Georgia, headquarters are there. They had a data breach. Within 24 hours, their CEO goes into the media and says, I'm in charge, we have an issue, I don't have the answers, but I commit to getting the answers and restoring confidence in our organization as quickly as possible. Two different responses from two organizations that suffered very similar type of massive credit card breach. Which response do you think made their customers, their shareholders more excited, more encouraged, perhaps dealt with that unexpected change better? Home Depot. And the truth is, you're probably still shopping at Target and you're probably still shopping at Home Depot. I know very few folks who've said, you know, I'm not going to trust them because of the impact of losing my credit card. But again, looking at the response of your organization, looking at those and saying, what lessons can we glean from that? Again, I'm not out to get Target. I'm not out to get Home Depot. There's Target and Home Depot within a mile of my house. I go to both all the time. It hasn't impacted how I do business with either of those companies. The idea is, what lessons can we glean from that? In your incident response plans, should, and I hope it doesn't happen, knock on wood, all the things that you do to ward off the evil things from happening, when that happens in your organization, what does your plans look like? Do you have the phone numbers of your key executives, your board members, in the event something like that needs to happen? Do you have statements that say, here's what, you might even read, it says, there's a problem, words that say, here, we're going to work on it, and what to expect next. So that in the middle of the crisis, you're not all staring at a screen projecting a Word document that says, what are we going to tell the media? Again, ideas of how can we take information like this, things that occurred, and say, how can we learn from that, adjust our responses, and be able to respond better in the event something like that were to happen to our organizations. When we're looking at this, how do we defend our organizations? Again, this is our first conversation with our network teams. What are the things that we expect of them? What's the leveling up and the discipline around looking at these configurations and determining how long can we stand to not know that change has occurred in our networking systems? Having standards, documented configurations. Again, all the places we can work with, our vendors, CIS, SANS, NSA, ISACs that you work with can help you as your starting point of what's the configuration of your production firewalls. Use that as a guide, customize it to meet your needs, and then lock that in. What are the procedures, the written manuals? Maybe you can give folks assignments. When I joined the security team many years ago, my first security team many years ago, my second assignment was work with the networking team and work with the Windows admin team to have a hardened configuration guide. Wouldn't you know it, we had an audit finding that says you've got good security in place, but you don't have a document that says check by check all the things that you have in place, and a document that preserves and kind of outlines what those settings are. So for weeks at a time, I locked myself in a conference room with some other admins and security professionals, and we went through each of these checklists to say, here's this check, here's the value in our company. The next check, how are we going to set that up for our given organization? And when all that was over, then we had documentation that says, here's what's in place, here's what we expect of our systems, and we truly were able to give that document in electronic format to the administrators of our group policy objects. They matched those checks in the policy, locked them in, and then we had those applied across all of our Windows server in our given environment. Again, those ideas of starting from a known good, a trusted source you've worked with in the past, modify it to meet your needs, and then lock it in your organizations. Again, looking for these of how do we have those in place for our networking devices, looking at these lists, having these configurations defined, and being hyper vigilant around how do we make sure that we're able to know when change occurs, alert someone to know when these changes occur so that we can again shrink that window of time and answer better that question of how long can we stand to not know when change has occurred. This is a place where you're going to need a tool. Some piece of technology, maybe a management tool that you have in place, maybe a tool that does file integrity checking to look for changes that occur in your organization and alert when those changes happen. Maybe it's a tool that's able to manage the devices that you have in place, gives you the ability to also push the configs and make sure that those configurations have not changed. Maybe it'd be a tool like Tripwire, OSSec, Beyond Compare. Beyond Compare is a nice tool. I think it's like $30, really cheap to have, where it compares two text files, turns out configuration files or text files, compare those configurations. When there's a change, be able to alert those. Some of the commercially supported tools not only can alert you when there's a change, but actually revert it back to the change that you had in place. So not just alert, but revert back and then give you an alert that those changes have happened to your configs for your network devices. Looking at two-factor authentication, a place where, again, as promised yesterday, a place where you might want to consider having dedicated equipment, dedicated laptops for network administration teams, requiring them to have two-factor authentication. How can I make sure not just having a username and a password are all that's needed to log into your production network equipment? RSA tokens, Google authenticators, codes that can say on a regularly changing basis, how can I make sure that it really is someone who logs in and not someone pretending to be someone else? Things that hopefully you have in place for your systems as well is like with Google Authenticator. Google Authenticator for me is able to let me log into sensitive sites such as my Gmail account. When I log in and I have my shift for the SANS Internet Storm Center, I have to put in my username, a wicked long password, and for Google Authenticator to have a code every 60 seconds, a code that changes, and so that I can make sure that it really is me because of the risk of someone possibly getting my account and causing reputational risk and damage to the SANS Internet Storm Center. And so there's no risk for me in opening that up and seeing and showing I'm not at risk at all, because these particular codes for different websites I use, they change on a regular basis. How are we able to do things similar to that, or maybe even more commercially supported solutions for network administrators? We want you to level up in how you authenticate to make sure that it really is them. Maybe with key pairs or key signature files. Or maybe we're able to have ways to make sure that it really is someone that doesn't just have a username and password, to make sure that we're able to let them log in to and have multi-factor authentication, and make sure that those sessions, since those sessions contain usernames, passwords, etc., configuration changes, make sure that as that data is transmitted, it's done so over a secure channel, such as SSH, SSL, TLS, etc. Picture's worth a few words here. Again, the entity relationship diagram that says when you go to inspect and see how good are you doing at this particular control, what are the things that you expect to see? Conversations with your network team. Help me understand. Show me, let me stand behind you or sit beside you and watch you log in to these systems to show that multi-factor is required. Again, a place where perhaps the risk is high enough in your organization, you want to have a dedicated environment for these network administrators to do their function, and then a separate machine for them to check their email, whatever it is that they're going to do that's non-administrative in nature. Management systems, whatever systems they might have in place to manage these configurations, check them and have alerts when they were to change. And these can apply to small businesses as well. Perhaps your Cisco equipment, perhaps your network device management systems can help you have that insight and visibility to log into a system and have it pull the configurations from your firewall switches, routers, and border devices, so that you can have a dashboard or a screen that shows the status. Are they up to date? Is the configuration what you would expect? Again, think in terms of, can you use your network management systems to give you that extra information security visibility to your organization? Here's a sample tool, actually in the 5-day class, where we're able to have more time with labs. We actually have a lab where you use this particular tool called Nipper. The idea is you can take the configuration file and do checks and comparisons against it. Think about the scans. What's really nice about this, the tool, I think it's free for like limited use, and even the commercial version is just $1,500 for 50 devices to get full commercial support for an extensive list of network device configurations. Simple to look at. I mean, red is bad, red's always bad. Green's good, green's supposed to be good. And then you can look at these and say, what are the particular issues? What does it map to from an authoritative reference? And what's the recommendation of? What does it take to change that from a critical finding back to one that doesn't have risk in your organization? Auditing in advance of audits configuration checks, cybersecurity posture assessments, things that say what can we use to determine the state of our configurations. Again, this is the behavior of how these network devices are configured, how they work, the services, the authentication levels to get into, log in and work with these network devices. Again, a good tool for auditors, good tool for security professionals, as well as our network administrators. So we're looking at these. How do we evaluate how good we're doing at control number 11? The business goal, the reason we're doing this, the why behind our what is to protect our network devices by using secure configurations. Systems that we're going to test are production network devices, maybe ones in our test lab, network device configurations. What are those? What should they be? How does it compare against the Center for Internet Security or SANS or NSA or FS-ISAC if you're in the financial services area? What are the ways that you can look at these, have an informative reference, and ask questions of, are these configured in the way that can help our organization support the services that are necessary, but also reduce risk by having a hardened and locked down configuration? Is there the opportunity when someone were to make a particular change or attempt to make a change in your configurations on your network devices that someone would know about it? Are there email alerts? Are there pager alerts? Are there text messages that would come out that says, by the way, we've just done a change to our core routers and we just thought you'd like to know about it? What are things in place where you can know when those changes occur and quickly validate they should be done, and if not, quickly be able to revert back? When we look at the measures, when we look at the things that we're doing to make sure that we're being able to know when these happen, we look at these particular steps. Again, we're focusing on percentage. I don't know how many devices you have in your network, so we're going to give you percentages to say, of all the devices, what's the percentage of our devices that don't utilize a standard, documented configuration standard per device type. So all of our firewalls, which ones do we not have a standard for, mapped out to list all the things necessary to support a particular business function. Routers, all the routers we have, do they follow a standard configuration or do they not? And what's those numbers to help us understand the state of areas where we would want to invest in and get a better score for those particular device types? What's the percentage of organizations' network devices not regularly compared against approved security configurations defined for these particular devices? How often do we push out these configurations? Is there a normal window of time where these changes occur? Maybe in your organization it's Thursday night, 7 p.m. till midnight. I know several organizations use that particular time frame for approved changes. The idea of if something really happens in your organization, your company may not be able to function normally on Friday, and you have the weekend to help recover from any of those particular changes. That's why it's very important with our change approval tickets to say, I want to make this change. Here's a change I want to do, 7 o'clock on Thursday night. And in the event that change doesn't work, I've got a backup plan. Maybe you've taken a copy of the configuration pre-change and be able to save that in the event something happens as a part of your testing, and you might need to revert those particular changes back to their original configuration. Here's a tough one here. What percentage of your organization's network devices are not utilizing the latest stable version of security updates? How often does Cisco give us security updates for our network devices? About every 6 months we get updates for iOS from Cisco. So a to-do is, how can you work with your network teams to get yourself and get them on the email lists that say and announce from Cisco when there's new updates to iOS? So that you're aware of them, you know when they come, you know the patterns, whatever types of testing plans, rollout plans, perhaps in your lower environments of let's put these configurations on our test routers, make sure that they work, traffic flows through them, maybe there's new features, maybe there are new settings that could be applied that help our organization, and then determine at what frequency do we want those changes to be applied in our given environment. How often do network administrators like to make changes to their network? Never. Close to never or never? Yeah. When you think about it, when we compare, contrast what we expect of them versus our Windows administrators, how often do our Windows administrators get to apply patches and push them out into their environments? Monthly? Almost every single month we're requesting that work of them. Here's something to think about. How do we incent our network administrators? When you think of an area of, network administration teams, so let's say we're all network administrators in class. I want to incent you financially to be a good network administrator. What type of metric do you think I want to give to say, okay, when I judge you at the end of the month, do you or do you not get a $10,000 bonus for being the best network administrator in this classroom? What's probably the metric I'm going to use? Uptime. Is the network available? The 5 nines, 99.999%, the network is always available. Applying updates every 6 months to a network, and the network configurations might not work, there could be issues, all of a sudden there's resistance. Wait a second, we want our network to be up and running, not particularly secure and most up-to-date versions of software from Cisco. So I tell you that to say, think about how are you incenting your network administrators in your organization. Now, I want uptime as much as you want uptime as well. But there's this tension between uptime and running the latest configurations from whatever vendor that we're getting our network equipment from. Become better informed when to know when these updates are in place. Look for some incentives for folks. When it's CIO, their incentives are the same. Uptime. 5 nines equals you get probably more than a $10,000 bonus for leaders, IT leaders in organizations. What are places where we can get the opportunity to apply those updates as quickly as possible? Testing them. We want to make sure they're working. We certainly don't want to hurt uptime in our organizations, but we do want to be informed when the updates come out. Maybe having test labs, lower environments, non-production environments. Maybe organizations will have different legs of production. Maybe leg A, leg B, leg C of production. You can do some testing, say, to one of the legs of production, see if it works. If everything gives us comfort, then there's not risk at availability in our organization as well. So sometimes scaling wide in our ability to have more than one device or more than one type of environment from a high availability perspective can help us bring and address this particular risk outlined here in number 4 in this measure. What percentage of our network devices are not managed using multi-factor authentication and encrypted sessions? Hopefully you've got a high score, you've got a really good score in this particular metric, but if you don't, looking for all those places where it's not enabled by default, or maybe it's not configured at this particular time. So an opportunity to look at those configurations to say, you know what, Telnet FTP, while they work, of course, the risks of sending that information in the clear is not effective. Maybe we want to level up and go to SSL, TLS, SSL, having a secure channel to send those configurations and passwords and configuration information in that transmission. If you're not using dedicated machines, again, I promised you I'd talk about it 3 times, and that's time number 2, to consider that for some high risk, high value positions based on the risk that those devices could their computers could cause to our environments, like the exercise or like the example I gave you yesterday of domain admins don't need to surf the web and don't need to check their email with elevated access. Very similar concept here of perhaps having a dedicated system. When it's time to administer the network devices, log in, check, change those, perhaps it's best to not have a system that can go to the internet and check eBay or run an online business on the same device. Again, yesterday I mentioned if cost is a factor, perhaps having a dedicated virtual machine or Citrix or VDI session to allow those network administrators to have the access they need to do their job, but not allow them doing their job to introduce unnecessary risk into your organization. And then our core evaluation steps, again, what are the steps that we can see? How good are we doing these things? In this particular one, on 10 authorized network devices on various portions of your network, how long does it take for changes to be detected? Again, the idea of this is perhaps you'll make a change to the login banner. Instead of it saying warning at the top, maybe it says warning and an exclamation point. Push out that configuration, pull out your stopwatch, and hopefully very quickly someone's going to detect there's been a push of a configuration change. I don't want you to intentionally weaken your devices, but just make a change to those and see how long until someone notices, how long until someone raises their hand and says, wait a second, it's not Thursday at 7 p.m. I didn't see a change ticket. I did get indication that a configuration file has changed on our production network devices, and we want to bring that to someone's attention. And then finally, when we do these good things, here's where we get credit for these in our standards and our compliance requirements for our organization as well.